Well, hello everyone and welcome to my library, and today's video is sponsored by Ren. If you're new here and you have no idea who I am, my name is Chinzia, and if you're one of my lovely regulars, hi, how are you? I hope you're doing splendidly. So today we're going to have a weekly chat about the man who discovered Troy, or was rather credited for discovering Troy. But technically he's more of a I use the word fraudster, I think, or con man in the title. It's a harsh exaggeration of what he was, but he wasn't the nicest chap. He's certainly not a professional archaeologist, and he certainly gets far more credit than is due to him. This is a prime example of a rich man getting famous for doing other people's work because he's rich and was able to do it, because he had the resources to do it. But in discovering it, because he's an amateur, he did far more damage to the archaeological site that is today that we know Iliam, Troy, than he actually benefited it. So let me tell you the tale of the fraud who discovered and ultimately destroyed Troy. Heinrich Schliemann was a millionaire with a love for antiquity, but his life didn't actually start off that way. He was born in 1822 near the German city of Rostock to a poor pastor who wasn't able to afford to send any of his 9 children to higher education. Heinrich thus started out apprenticing to a grocer at the age of 14 before working as a cabin boy on a ship bound from Hamburg to Venezuela, with the ambition of one day being able to emigrate. However, after the vessel was wrecked off the Dutch coast, Heinrich became an office boy and then a bookkeeper for a trading firm in Amsterdam. Heinrich was a polyglot. Within a year of living in the Netherlands, he was not only fluent in Dutch, but Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, and later on in life, Russian, Swedish, Danish, Polish, Arabic, Turkish, French, ancient Greek, and Latin. Yeah. He learned Russian after 1846, when his firm sent him to St. Petersburg as an agent there, and it was actually in Russia where he made his fortune. Heinrich set up his own businesses and embarked on the indigo trade and made a fortune as a military contractor during the Crimean War. By the 1860s, Heinrich semi-retired at the age of 36, lucky him, and this is where he began devoting his life to archaeology. So, according to his records, Heinrich claims that his interest in ancient Greek developed during his time as a grocer's apprentice, when he used to hear a drunken man in the store reciting passages from Homer, apparently on a regular basis. That's a thing there. Interesting job. And that led him to go on to study ancient Greece in archaeology courses at the Sorbonne in Paris. Heinrich was so obsessed with the ancient Greek world that he decided that he wanted to make Greece his home and married a, quote, black-haired Greek woman with a Homeric spirit. The trouble was, he was actually already married at this point. He was married to a Russian woman called Ekaterina Lishina and had 3 children with her. So he did what any good man would do. He went to America in 1869 and was granted US citizenship there in New York. And then also, whilst he was there, 2 birds, 1 stone, was granted a divorce from his Russian wife in the state of Indiana. And it was during that time he was learning Greek, and he used his teacher to help him find a new wife. And in September of the same year that he got divorced from his Russian wife, he married Athenian-born 17-year-old Sophia Engastromenos, with whom he had 2 children, Andromache, who was born in 1871, and Agamemnon in 1878, because of course he would call them that. Though why would you call any child Agamemnon? I have no idea. Anyway, Schliemann then moved to Athens with his new wife and commissioned Ernest Ziller to construct a permanent residence there. The house, named Illumelatron in honour of Troy, was finished in 1880 and is still there today. You can go and see it. But now it actually houses the Numismatic Museum of Greece. So, as we can see just at the very beginning here of the story, Heinrich had an obsession with the Iliad and Homer, and being a rich man meant that he could dedicate the rest of his life to the archaeological accomplishments for which he is now renowned for. However, I use that term lightly. Let me explain. So in 1868, he went on a trip to the Greek island of Ithaca, where he decided to try and look for the palace of Ulysses. And from there he travelled to the Marmara Sea to make his way inland and start his quest for Troy, a city which had been merely a legend for the last few thousand years. Now, this is where things get a bit muddy, because whilst Heinrich is famed for discovering Troy, he was by no means working blind. Most of the hard work for locating Troy had been done long before Heinrich. I mean, for starters, British archaeologist Frank Calvert, who will be very important in the story, had already begun excavations on the Hisarlik Hill in the Troyes region of the northwest of present-day Turkey. I've done a whole video on the origins of Troy in that location. And it was actually his brother, Frederick, who had actually bought a farm of over 2,000 acres, which is around 8 square kilometres, of Akakoi in 1847. And this acquisition of land had actually included part of the Mount of Hisarlik. This was of note because Hisarlik had been identified by Charles McLaren as a possible site for the Homeric Troy in 1822 in his dissertation on the topography of the plain of Troy. So Heinrich was by no means an archaeological genius who randomly came across the site and formulated its location. His arrival on the site was only due to the work of Scottish journalist and geologist Charles McLaren, something which I find essential to highlight here as a Scottish citizen and a lover of Scotland. Give credit where credit is due. No one would be here unless a Scotsman did the work first. So, Charles McLaren, we're here for you. Additionally, a number of isolated discoveries had been made before Schliemann began digging in the area. The French geologist Ferdinand Foucault dug at Saint-Ouen in 1862 and found a fresco-covered walls of houses and painted pottery beneath 26 feet of pumice, the result of the great eruption that divided the original island into Thera, which is modern Thera, and Thrasis, which is modern Thracia. Geologists at the time dated the Santorin eruption to 2000 BCE, which suggested Foucault's finds were exceptionally ancient and were thus indicative of the existence of a prehistoric cultures thitherto unknown to the Aegean. So as you can see, Heinrich didn't actually make big waves in the discovery of Troy. A lot of people have been doing work in the area beforehand. However, Heinrich was essential to the operation for one primary reason only: money. Heinrich was a millionaire, and Heinrich had the financial resources that other archaeologists could only dream of having, which meant when Heinrich arrived in Hisarlik, Calvert, who we just discussed earlier, who owned the land, met Heinrich actually by sheer coincidence in 1868. And he convinced Heinrich to carry on digging where he had left off because Calvert had run out of money. He couldn't afford to keep digging here. Though whilst Heinrich had the financial means and the enthusiasm to carry on the excavation, his amateur status ended up being the second biggest downfall that the poor city of Troy had ever faced. So what did he do? Well, before I get into how Heinrich destroyed Troy for a second time, I'd actually like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Wren. Humanity is causing a rapid loss of biodiversity, and with it, Earth's ability to support complex life. But the mainstream is having difficulty grasping the magnitude of this loss, despite the steady erosion of the fabric of human civilization, just a casual thing. However, just this year, research from 3 leading institutions found that people in well-off countries can help avert climate breakdown by making relatively straightforward lifestyle changes, from their diet to their shopping habits. So Wren is a simple and effective way to make a difference in the climate crisis. Wren is a website where you can calculate your carbon footprint, then offset it by funding a diverse mix of carbon reduction projects like tree planting, mineral weathering, and rainforest protection. Wren's mission is to help you understand your lifestyle's environmental impact and show you how to reduce it. So by answering a few questions about your lifestyle, Wren calculates your carbon footprint and gives you tips and advice on reducing it. No one can reduce their carbon footprint to zero, but we can start somewhere. So after filling out a quiz online, you can sign up to make monthly contributions to a global project to offset your carbon footprint. Every month you'll get updates on how the money was spent and photos and details of every tree that was planted, every acre reforested, basically every ton of carbon offset. So offset your carbon footprint today with Wren. The first 100 people who sign up using my link in the description box and in the first pinned comment will get 10 extra trees planted in their name. So thank you, Wren, for sponsoring today's video, and now let's talk about how Heinrich destroyed Troy again. So it's clear from their letters to one another that Calvert did his very best to clear up Heinrich's understanding of the full nature of the Hisarlik mound, that he had actually agreed to continue excavating. In January 1869, he wrote to Heinrich saying, It has taken me years to become the possessor of the part of the mound, with the express purpose of excavating it. My ideas were based on the finding of walls of Troy, the antiquities in the shape of the marbles, coins, etc., paying for the expenses of excavation and the value of the field, which would be rendered useless for agriculture or any other purpose. When you stated to me that you wished to find the walls of Troy, I at once consented, for, to tell you the truth, I cannot spare the necessary amount for excavating the mound at present, and as it is generally understood, and you're not mentioning anything to the contrary, the objects found remain to the proprietor of the land. I am willing, nevertheless, to meet you halfway, if you agree to it, which is that half of the objects found are to be my property after deduction, made by the duplicates, which may or may not be claimed by the Turkish government. The division to be made as follows: the objects to be separated into 2 portions, as equal value as possible, and then to draw lots. Afterwards, exchanges can be made between us. In another letter, Calvert counselled Heinrich in the appropriate excavation methods for testing the mound to determine a suitable location for concentrating his efforts. Calvert wrote, "The plan I would adopt would be to make open trenches across the mound down the neutral soil, and others at right angles, and only when anything interesting comes to view to open out the structure or foundations. In this matter, much unprofitable ground might be left untouched." I believe it was in this manner that Layard excavated the Nineveh mound. Wherever I have excavated in this mound, the soil is artificial, not only on the slopes, but on its summit, and in some places deeper than others. The average, I should say, would be around 10 to 12 feet. I naturally conclude that the rest of the flat hill is similarly composed of artificial soil. Trusting in Schliemann, Calvert shared not only the site itself and half the artefacts therein, but also his expertise and the fruit of the excavation. But Schliemann went on to recast the events concerning his 1868 trip to the Troud in order to garner the glory of the discovery for himself, and published a book, Ithaca, le Peloponnese et le Troie, which was published and written before he even stuck a spade into the damn earth. Schliemann didn't start digging until 1871, and did so in a manner which completely contradicted all of Calvert's advice. In his letter, Schliemann wrote, "We shall begin the excavation from the foot of the mountain and dig until we reach the virgin soil, and follow the same up. The lowest range of buildings on the virgin soil must, of course, be the most ancient." The importance of digging down to the virgin soil had already been impressed upon him by Calvert. He then wrote to Calvert, "I am now progressing much faster than before, and I hope to accomplish it in 2 months hence, a cut through the whole hillock on the virgin soil of 23 metres broad. If I then see any encouragement, I shall attack the remainder of the 3 sides, all at once." Archaeologists are screaming right now. But despite Schliemann's deceit and exploitation of his knowledge, Calvert continued to offer assistance to him, counselling him on archaeological methodology. But Schliemann was finding stuff by disemboweling the earth without any analytical thought or process, and receiving praise abroad for his finds. So Calvert's advice and feedback went completely unheeded, and Schliemann just carried on as he was. On top of that, Schliemann was incorrectly dating and interpreting his findings, claiming fragments of buildings that were evidently Doric and Corinthian to be from the Homeric era. And eventually, Calvert just hit his limit in 1972. Calvert made it clear that he did not support all of Schliemann's ideas, writing very politely, "I do not doubt that the Homeric site will be found, but those vases found together with stone implements I cannot reconcile in my mind within the Homeric period." In response to Schliemann's questioning of Calvert's archaeological judgment, the latter responded on 13th of April 1872, "I am not an enthusiast, and when I make a statement, I base it on fact." On the 21st of April 1872, Schliemann retorted, "You must excuse me that I trouble you so much, but I am working for the glory of Troy, and you cannot but benefit yourself from my success." Calvert wrote back, coolly, on the 3rd of May, "Your excavations must be very interesting, and I shall visit them sometime when you come to something decisive." You see, in 1872, Schliemann discovered what he was convinced were the Trojan walls, and he became frustrated that Calvert wasn't congratulating him on his momentous discovery. But Calvert, knowing that Schliemann had very poor archaeological judgment, didn't give Schliemann the attention that he craved, and the relationship deteriorated rapidly from there. Then Schliemann went full scum mode. I mean, first and foremost, he started smuggling what he called Priam's treasure out of Turkey with the help of Calvert's brother, Frederick. But before we get into that, you're probably wondering, what is Priam's treasure? Well, we're not exactly sure, because again, a little bit funny here. Over the years, Calvert had made several discoveries, which included a substantial number of valuable gold and silver pieces, which Schliemann had access to because Calvert's kind nature and he just trusted him. And some believe that it was actually Calvert's discoveries that Schliemann named Priam's treasures. And they're the things that he smuggled out. But additionally, there were letters that suggest that Schliemann made a substantial find on the 31st of May, which could also be called Priam's treasure. It may have been a combination of the two things, it may have just been his discovery, we don't all know. All we know is that Schliemann smuggled it out of Turkey against the agreement that he made with Calvert years earlier and sent it over to Athens. But again, Schliemann's lack of archaeological knowledge once again turned round to bite him in the arse, because archaeologists were quick to realise that the loot that he called Priam's treasure actually predated the Trojan War by some 1,250 years, meaning it belonged to an entirely different civilization than that featured in Homer's epic poem. Schliemann was basically a fraud with more confidence than credibility. He manufactured and embellished his accomplishments and even his whole life for his autobiography. Some people believe that Schliemann even stole his childhood love of Troy and the dream to discover the walls of it from Calvert himself. After years of being subjected to Schliemann's manipulation, exploitation and humiliation, Calvert wrote an article on the 25th of January in 1873 in the Levant Herald, in which he summarised the finding of the Harslick excavations and concluded that Schliemann had, to that point, unearthed nothing that could be connected to the Homeric age of Homer, but he was still gracious to Schliemann, adding in the article that his energetic friend, Mr. Schliemann, in his further contemplative researches, may be able to complete the missing link and discover the lost Homeric Troy. For if ever the world-famed city existed, the probability is that Harslick marks its site. Calvert never sunk to Schliemann's level, but despite all the betrayal, the abuse and the dismissal of his expertise. But Schliemann saw this as a slight and fired back regardless of Calvert's generous nature. He attacked Frank and Frederick Calvert vehemently, both in letters and then in an 1874 publication, Antiques Troyennes, in which he claimed that he had discovered the Temple of Athena, usurping all of Calvert's work and dismissing the trenches Calvert discovered. Calvert refuted these claims, tried to defend himself, but Schliemann came back even harder. Schliemann wrote to the United States ambassador G.H. Boker on the 2nd of December 1874, claiming that Frank Calvert has published a monstrous libel against me. It was beneath my dignity to answer the libels. It is the fate of all discoveries to be envied, ill-treated, persuaded and libelled, and all this will cease only at my death. He responded publicly to Calvert on the 31st of March 1875, claiming that not the least funny thing in Mr. Calvert's article is the assertion that it was he who first indicated to me Harslick was the site of Troy, and that I avowed that I had not previously given attention to the subject. I first saw Mr. Calvert on my return to the plain of Troy, was happy to hear that he also shared my opinions regarding the identity of the Homeric Ilion with the posterior city of that name. Yeah, so you knew about the site before Calvert, despite Calvert purposely buying the land because he wanted to excavate it years before you ever came here. Okay, Schliemann. In his rebuttal, Calvert quoted Schliemann's letter that he wrote to him on the 22nd of January 1869, and in this letter Schliemann said to him, "Had anybody else proposed to me to dig away at a hill at my own cost, I would not have listened to him." This is the showing of receipts in the 19th century. I'm living for it. So after paying the Turkish government a sizable amount of money for their share of Priam's treasure, Schliemann attempted to get further permissions to continue his excavations. But then he realised quite early on that Calvert was needed and that an amendment should be made. So he selfishly tried to approach Calvert to repair their relationship, but Calvert told him very politely to do one. After failing to secure permission to excavate Troy from the government, Schliemann then left to Mycenae. But the drama was not over. In 1878, W.C. Borlase wrote an expose of Schliemann's erroneous account of the excavation of Priam's treasure, and frequently, within the expose, praised Calvert and corrected the errors made by Schliemann's false accounts by repositioning Calvert and crediting him for the excavations. Enraged, Schliemann responded to Sir E. Max Miller in 1823, branding Calvert a foul friend and a liar who's been libelling me for years. However, then Schliemann remembered again that he was still planning to mount excavations at Harselig, and to do so he needed to make amends with Calvert for all of this stuff, because Calvert owned the land he wanted to excavate. Now, no one actually knows how they came to a sort of agreement, but in 1879, Schliemann was excavating Hene Tepe, and throughout the 1880s, the two actually collaborated on excavations throughout the Trode, and a friendship actually began to blossom between the pair. But the damage Schliemann had done to the site needed much longer than just a decade. You see, the enormous 45-foot deep trench that Schliemann had dug was done so brutally. Schliemann ploughed through layers of soil and everything in them without any proper record keeping. There were no mappings of the findings, very few descriptions of the discovery, and now, over 150 years later, Turkish archaeologists are still working to address the damage that Schliemann did. If you're curious, some of the 10,000 or so artefacts included in Priam's treasure are actually housed in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum, and others actually ended up in Berlin, but they were seized by the Red Army at the end of World War II and transferred to the Pushkin Museum in Moscow as compensation for the damage that was inflicted by the Nazis during the war. Schliemann died in 1890, but Calvert carried on with the excavation, and in what we can only call karma, only Calvert lived long enough to see the walls of Troy. Schliemann died just 3 years before the late Bronze Age fortification walls of Troy were uncovered and subsequently identified by his architect and assistant Wilhelm Dorpfel. Calvert kept a quiet life. He didn't publish nearly as much as Schliemann, primarily because he was more cautious with his ideas and findings, and he never fought for the spotlight. But he had a more sincere, genuine dream of discovering the walls of Troy, and he quietly and humbly accomplished so before dying at the age of 80 in 1900. So that is the fraudster millionaire archaeologist who is largely credited for discovering Troy, but actually only did so on the backs of many academics before him. Multimillionaires get a lot of credit where credit isn't always due. They work off the backs of others, and I like the idea of kind of repositioning the story, although I liked at the end that they became friends in their weird little way of collaborating. Money and mind went together in the end, and whilst Calvert is not the famed one at the end of the day, at least he got to see the walls of Troy, and I think that is the justice that was deserved. So thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you again, Ren, for sponsoring today's video, and I shall see you soon for another video. Remember to please subscribe if you are not subscribed, and maybe consider checking out my Patreon. There are new videos over on there every month for certain tiers, and I will see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.